I am Reverend Brian Ferguson. I have the honour of serving as the minister here. And today's story comes from who knows where. It's actually in many, many different traditions. But a lot of my favourite stories involve donkeys. And this story involves a donkey. I think I heard a donkey noise here. Is there a donkey in the congregation? A donkey called Isabel. Well, this is a story of a donkey, but this donkey was a rather unfortunate donkey because it was walking and it was trying to get water out this well, and it fell in, a water well. It fell into the well. So it started bleating and making lots and lots of noise. And so the owner, the farmer, kind of looked at it and thought, how am I going to get the donkey out the well? So he's throwing ropes down and trying to pull it up. The donkey's trying to scramble up, but he can't quite do it. But the donkey just keeps making this racket, this noise. So even at night when the donkey's in the well and everyone's trying to get to sleep in the farmhouse, the donkey's making this racket. So the farmer gets really angry. So he gets a shovel and he goes out there. He says, I'm going to bury the donkey in the well. That's a bit of an extreme reaction. So he starts throwing earth in there, and the donkey realizes what's happening and he gets really angry and is making even more noise. And then eventually, it goes quiet. And the farmer wonders, have I buried the donkey? And he looks in and the donkey's there, just standing there looking up at him. So he throws another thing of earth and he sees what the donkey's doing. The earth's landing in the donkey's back, shaking it off. He steps over, pets it down, another one. So he's been building his own little pile up there. And the farmer realizes that, so he calls help. So he starts throwing more earth in there, and the donkey just keeps taking the earth, throwing it over, stamping it down, and he just builds this pile up until eventually it climbs out, and all the people there are rejoicing and are really happy. But the donkey's not very happy about this, because they tried to bury him. So the donkey kind of looks and just walks off, giving them only that mad stare that only donkeys can do, and walks off. The thing I love about that story, when we're talking about transformation and resilience today, and I think what resilience is when something bad or something traumatic or something stressful is happening to you, you have to adjust. You can't just stay there. You have to do something different. You saw how the donkey realized, I'm getting buried, but then eventually realized, I can just tip the earth off and build my own pile. And I think that's what resilience is. Resilience is adjusting to situations to make it better and transform it to a place of safety, to a place of comfort, even though it may be traumatic and stressful. So that's the donkey in the well story. And I love donkey stories. So it's time for your religious education classes now. We'll sing the children out and the words will be on the screen.
When I did a little bit of search for what I wanted to talk about today, I read a lot of poetry. It just wasn't coming, and so I went to the web and looked up resilience, because we'd been talking about it, about our children and grandchildren recently, and strength. And I came out of a family that built for strength, but not resilience. You can get quite brittle. So the first thing over and over to build resilience that came up was be kind to yourself. Start there to build resilience. So, be kind to yourself. That's why that sometimes works. So I wrote this. Between an ending and the beginning to my major life trajectory, I was beginning over and over in an exhaustive cycle of becoming the sole emotional support of my two children and searching for a viable way to financially support us. Single parenthood is draining, with spots of refueling and resetting of intentions. My placement company focused on mid-level men's jobs, mostly insurance-related in Hartford, Connecticut. Some computer technology, a new area. They hired me. They hired me to focus on women's work. In their way of thinking, that meant the low-level jobs. Send anyone away who did not really have strong, placeable skills. We're not a counseling office, just get rid of them, ASAP. I had a special office in the back with my own small desk and a secretarial chair, separated from the main floor by a half wall, also separated by sniggering and male posturing as I made my way through their desks to the ladies and back. Wandering across the street during a lunchtime, I faced the Bushnell Concert Hall. Tonight would be the Brahms Requiem. I didn't know much about that work, but the longing that welled up in my heart and soul was not to be denied. I had just enough cash, courage, and hope to take a standing room only ticket. I needed something, anything, to take me out of the life I had behind me in that employment office. After work, I wandered in Hartford until the concert hall opened. And no, I did not know that work or even a format of a requiem. I did find a seat before the main requiem started and sat down gratefully. I simply absorbed the music in the hall, bathing my very being with gentleness, tears, heights. As the music moved me, I also contemplated the musicians of the orchestra. How many years of study did each bring to this concert? How many hours of practice? And were their parents supportive of such non-lucrative choices? What had they given up to be here this evening? Tears streamed down my face. Their courage, dedication, and musical skill awed me, a transcendent experience. I left that night renewed, strengthened, and inspired to find a better path for me and our little family. Within 6 weeks, I was working as a trainee IT systems engineer at a large insurance company willing to invest in me. Resilience.
Jean mentioned in a reflection about one of the things you need to show yourself is kindness, and that helps build up resilience. I think the other thing that helps build up resilience is being appreciated by a community, as we just did with the musicians, as we did with Jean's reflection and Robin and Tovis. Being appreciated helps us build up resilience. It gives us the strength, it gives us the courage to maybe make that change that allows us to be more resilient. Now, I always say that church and worship services should be a place of healing and a place of comfort and challenge. At the risk of traumatizing you all, I'm going to remind you it's 4 years since the beginning of the pandemic. I know March 13th was when it was declared a national emergency by President Trump. I know March 15th was the first service I did moving online, Sunday, March 15th. And I wasn't here at Redwood City at the time. This was back in Austin. But I imagine that was the weekend you went back there. And I remember the mad scramble as we all tried to figure out, how are we going to do online worship? I think we had a 12-hour Saturday rehearsal at my congregation with technology and rushing out and buying microphones. And I don't miss that. There was another 18 months we were online till we did the first service here in person. And I think when we think back to the pandemic, it was certainly a transformative time. I think we've all been changed by it. But I also think our religious community here showed incredible resilience, because we showed how we could adapt and be flexible and change and accommodate. Many of us who thought Zoom was a cartoon character became intimate with it and ran our own sessions of Zoom. And I think it's important to remember, because I think one of the things that gives us the strength and courage to handle new adversity is knowing that we've been through it before. And we have been through it as a community, as a nation, and We all have challenges as individuals, and we're going to have individuals in the future, so we need to grow our capacity for resilience. It's definitely not a one and done situation, as much as I wish it was. Resilience is that ability to withstand and transcend severe challenges in life. And it can be a great catalyst for growth. Now, you've heard me say many times, there's no inherent meaning in suffering or challenge, but we can interpret meaning and challenge and grow from it. And I loved what Jean said about being kind to self. And we often talk about a wonderful first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of each person. And I like to remind everyone that the inherent worth and dignity of each person means yourself. And in the new Article 2, what we're talking about with love being the overarching value, it's important to love yourself. Recognize your own inherent worth and dignity. Recognize the love you have for yourself, because that is another path. Appreciate yourself. That's another path to build up your own resistance, your own resilience and resistance. And resilience is actually more of a process than a character trait. It's actually more a process that we need to go through. We need to build up resilience. Some people may be genetically programmed towards it, but I think most of us have to learn from past experiences. And I think certainly it sounds what happened in the GRIP program. You learned at your past experiences and you developed your resilience. And the resilience came to allow you to do the transformation. And part of resilience is that flexibility and adaptability that is key, has been key historically to human evolution. I just finished a book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Harari. He's a professor of history at the University of Jerusalem. And he looks at that period 30,000 to 70,000 years ago of how there was this cognitive revolution in human beings. And I find it quite fascinating what he said, because up until that point, humans were like any other mammal on the planet, until they developed this idea that they could transcend their own senses. They didn't have to experience something by seeing it or hearing it or smelling it or touching it. They could imagine things that they never actually experienced. And that was a huge cognitive revolution, because what that actually started to allow us to bond groups together through myth, through stories, and of course, religion. And the telling of myths and stories allowed human sapiens to collaborate in large numbers in extremely flexible ways. And that's what separated us from other animals. And I think of the pandemic, how we as nations, as communities, adapted in flexible ways to overcome the challenges of the pandemic. And that's not to belittle the huge numbers of people who died and suffer ongoing illness from it. That was a tragedy. Yet it might have been a lot worse through the cooperations that humans achieved, and not to mention the wonderful work of scientists to provide vaccines. But there's another part of Yuval Harari's book that I found really interesting, and it was the idea that when Columbus first arrived in America, or in the Caribbean, he was using a map that detailed the whole world. He knew every place in the world. Of course they didn't. He actually thought he was in East India. He was actually in a Caribbean island. But then subsequent explorers realized, no, this is a new continent. These maps are not right. There's so much that we don't know. And it was only in the 1500s that they started to do maps with unknowns. If you ever look at the old maps, you maybe see the things, there be monsters in places that they didn't know. There be dragons. But that was a really powerful cognitive shifts for human beings. Because what happened, it's piqued curiosity, because you'd see maps of the American continent, and they'd only have the East Coast, they wouldn't have the West Coast. So when human beings see that unknown, it sparks a curiosity. And of course, we want to explore that. And Yuval Harari reckons this is why Europeans were the first, the Western Europeans were the first to really recognize we don't know everything. Our maps are incomplete. And that sparked the scientific revolution, that sparked this idea of the unknown, that sparked the curiosity, that sparked the explorations of it. And I love that idea of it's the unknown, that recognizing what we don't know is the spark to growth. And you think with Unitarian Universalism, this idea of ongoing growth, that we do not know everything, revelation's not sealed. The curiosity allows us to explore, be it internally, be it externally, be it geographically. And someone as wise as Socrates, we talked about wisdom earlier, Socrates said that real wisdom is knowing what you don't know. Real wisdom is knowing what you don't know. I can't help but thinking of planning, applying that to maps, where we actually acknowledge we don't know this huge part of the world. And Albert Einstein he said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that created them. We cannot solve the problems with the same thinking that created them. And I like that idea, and I think that's one of the unique things about Unitarian Universalism. We accept that we don't know everything. I've always had the problems with the free and responsible search for truth and meaning in our principles, because I don't know what truth is. I can find meaning through my interpretation, but I don't think I know what truth is. I think and scientists say that 70% of what we know now, they say it's wrong. What they really mean, it's incomplete. There'll be new developments. But we think we know everything. And even in the 1920s, the head of the UU Patent Office said everything that can be invented has been invented. I think there's evidence he was wrong. But one of the things about resilience is the idea it's grounded in growth and hope. Persistence is kind of you plant your feet, you kind of stay there, and you're just going to keep doing the same thing. I think resilience has got this adaptability, flexibility, got growth. It's got this sense of wanting to try new ways. And we often confuse change and transformation, and they're similar in some ways and they're different in others. And one of the best analogies I heard was the difference between change and transformation. Is if you're baking a cake and you have all the elements to make the cake, all the ingredients out on the table, and you leave, and someone comes in and moves them all around. That's change, because you can reverse them all. If someone breaks into your house, and I keep hoping one of you will do this, breaks into your house and makes a cake, that's transformation. I don't think you can get the flour, the sugar, and the butter out. So that you've been thinking, and the obvious example is the caterpillar to the butterfly, the ultimate in biological transformation. But I think with individual transformation, it begins with an emotional event. It's an emotional response to an event, to a story that does something deep within us. And that results in something we can't unsee. It's a kind of veil lifted from our eyes. A circumstance exposed, or a worldview shifted. And we forever see the world differently. And I think one of the keys to resilience when we are faced with a struggle is, I think a profound spiritual question is, What can I learn from this challenge? What can I learn from this challenge? And Unitarian Universalists, in my over 25 years with it, have challenged me and transformed me in a number of areas. I think the work we have done to bring greater justice to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community, work that still continues, has been transformative for me. And I also believe our anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural work has been transformative to me. Really having that permeate all aspects of my individual life, my community life, my ministry, and perhaps most importantly, my justice work. Our third strategic goal here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City is that we will become an anti-oppressive, inclusive fellowship who will continually learn from and partner with organizations in San Mateo County. GRIP is an example of a group we partner and learn from, as we have today. And I think what that goal is challenging us is to look at our own power, our own privilege, look at the various oppressions we've seen around us or we've experienced ourselves, and how can we develop greater resiliency? How can we be transformed about it, and how can we transform the world around us? My vision, my personal vision, is that I want to transform myself through the search for meaning, and I want to transform the world through acts of love. I want to transform the world through acts of love, and that's what grounds my justice work. And the goal is that multicultural work. And some people think multiculturalism, we're talking about bringing more people with different identities into the congregation. That's a consequence of doing the right thing. For me, multiculturalism is, can we see things from a different perspective? Can I see things beyond my straight, white, male identity? Can I see something from a queer perspective? Can I just understand something from an indigenous perspective? Can I see something from an African American perspective? That's the multicultural work I look for. And I think Unitarian Universalism, at its very core, we want to embrace different views of the world. We want to embrace different religious values. We want to look at different religions and what can we learn from them. Can we do that with different identities, different ethnic backgrounds? If we can't do it, who can? And I love, as an example of this, a story from the Hebrew scriptures of the Exodus story. Most of us know the story of Moses leading the Jews from slavery with the Egyptians. They travel the wilderness for 40 years, end up in Canaan. And to the African American community, that's been a powerful liberation story. Look at that story from the point of view of the Canaanites. Imagine an indigenous perspective of that story, an indigenous American perspective on the story of that. It's a conquest story. Someone came in and took over the land. So is it a liberation story or is it a conquest story? It's both, depending which perspective you look at. It's not that one's right or wrong, but it's all passed to a growth. That's the multiculturalism I want to build in our community. Whatever your identity is, can we see things from a different perspective? Can I see things from a feminist perspective? Can I see things from a transgender perspective? Not that I'm queer, not that I'm a woman, not that I'm transgender, but can I see and understand things from a different perspective? There's a richness and a spiritual growth in that will be transformative for us as individuals and for us as a community. Bell Hooks, the late great feminist author who really explored intersectionality, says, beloved community is formed not by eradication of difference, by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape us, who we are and how we live in the world. I also add, we can learn from others with different identities. We do not want to eradicate that difference. We want to learn from that difference. And that is going to be the tough, transformative work of the anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural work that's tied into a strategic goal 3. I want to finish with a story about a friend of mine. I was out with him last Saturday night. Leon was a classmate of mine at Star King, School for the Ministry. And I see him about once a year. I love the man dearly. When we were in seminary, we were having this conversation about our backgrounds. I was good friends with him in seminary as well. And we had very different backgrounds. He was from New Jersey. I'm actually a 13th English that you're learning, being Scottish. I grew up from a coal mining town, working class, first generation going to college. Leon's father was a lawyer. He had a PhD. Was a professor at Duke University. We talked. And then he looked at me at one point and said, "But Brian, you don't worry that when you call the police, you'll be the one that's arrested. Leon is black. You're not the one that will be worried if you get arrested." That story lifted the veil for me about the experience of being African American. I see the world totally differently because of that story. I see Leon completely differently from that story. And not that the difference separated us, the difference, I would say, if anything, brought us together. So, we've got some hard work ahead. We've got an election ahead. It's not going to be nice. But I think if we want to build our resilience for the time ahead, if we want to bring our resilience for the transformative work of the anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural work that we claim we want to, and which our Unitarian Universalist Association say we need to engage in for the welfare of our brothers and sisters with marginalized identities. And I think much of our resilience we can grow through our curiosity, approaching things with curiosity rather than judgment. Curiosity will lead to a humility that will open us to transformation. If we get rigid and stuck with who we are not opening ourselves to transformation. And we have this religious community. A religious community that will lovingly challenge us, nurture us, and support us in the difficult growth that we all have ahead. Every one of us will need to build resilience for the individual and societal changes ahead. Where would you rather learn that? In this beautiful, loving, supportive community. Right here, right now.